Welcome back. You're still watching Sunrise coming to you from Channels Television. Now we switch our focus to the plight of IDPs. Now, following an increase in the number of persons living in internally displaced persons camps in the country, the federal government, through the Ministry of Health, has declared a nutritional emergency which will commence in Borno State. The government has also mobilized a rapid response team to coordinate efforts to ameliorate the situation. Also, the internally displaced persons in the Federal Capital Territory have appealed to spirited individuals and organizations planning to contribute towards their well-being to deal directly with them rather than going through questionable NGOs. Oh dear. That makes me very sad, but well, there it is. Now, to look at the plight of IDPs in Nigeria at this moment, it's my pleasure to welcome the Executive Director of SEMA in Gombe, Dr. Danlami Rukuje.
Thanks for having me.
Good morning. And we also have in the studio the Executive Director of CESO. CESO is an NGO that busies itself by dealing with emergency relief for people such as IDPs, and she is Iya Jonathan. Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Doctor, you are the Executive Secretary of SEMA in Gombe. Now, can you just give us a picture of the situation of IDPs in that area?
Thank you. Good morning. IDPs in Gombe State are up to about 45,000 that are registered with the State Emergency Management Agency. But all of our IDPs live within the communities like every other citizen or indigene of Gombe State.
You have no camps?
We have no camp. We had a camp.
Okay.
Now, from the beginning of the insurgency, Gombe State made a deliberate plan to say that while what was happening in Borno, in Yobe, and Adamawa is not similar to what is happening in Gombe, but we knew that since we share borders with all these states, chances are that we're going to have a lot of people moving into Gombe. Therefore, we looked at what was the best approach to ensure that when people come in, they are taken care of. You will note that even before the insurgency, it was common sight for people to arrive a town and didn't know anybody, and yet found a roof over his head. And that was where our religious groups came in very handy, and the hospitality of the populace also came in handy. So, as people started moving into Gombe from Bama, from Konduga, from so many places, we were able to utilize these channels. But let me also make this correction. IDPs are not a homogeneous group. The tendency is for people to think that when somebody is called an IDP, then he needs assistance of food, of shelter, of clothing. No. It is a movement of people from their community. So if you're well-to-do in your community, you are likely to be also well-to-do as you moved, especially for those who moved before their communities were attacked. So we had IDPs who all they needed was a house to buy. And then
in the new location?
In the new location.
Okay.
And therefore you facilitated that for them, because the recipient communities were a little skeptical now, because we're dealing with a humanitarian crisis that involved a security crisis. So when I say, oh no, you can sell your house to this person, say, okay, fine, he buys this house. Some needed to just rent a house, but the landlord needed to have a clearance, if you like, and so SEMA came in. But then there are those who absolutely just left home with practically nothing. And those are the ones probably in the minority for us in Gombe, but those were the ones that we had to secure accommodation for them. If there was foodstuff from people, we were able to give, and we got support from all, from many directions, particularly from the indigenous of Gombe State, because we appealed to the people to say, look, this is what's happening. It could be any of us. And so people were coming, people would come to our office and said, doctor, I don't know, I have 3 rooms. I'm not sure whether it will be useful to you. And then we'll check. When we do have people, we take them there. I think the key thing is to have where you want to go to, so you don't get overwhelmed. Now, when we opened camp, was when from 50 IDPs daily, 120, we now had over 3,000. The whole local government was sacked, and the local government is very close to Gombe State, so they all moved in. But before then, the state government has already made an arrangement. We had accommodation that was built for certain other purposes, but for which we are now said, okay, supposing we now needed a place to keep people in the short term, where do we do that? The accommodation was ready, the keys were there. So when we couldn't now get people into the communities, we convened a meeting of the Humanitarian Coordination Forum and said, this was on our hand. Then we took a decision to say, okay, we can open camp. But then we opened our camp believing that that was a transit camp. So
which it ended up being.
Which ended up being.
Because there are no camps right now.
There are no camps.
Okay.
And how did our camp end? When people moved in, we realized that and it's a confirmation of what we had already known. The worst thing they can do to an African man, to a Nigerian man, is for him to wake up in the morning, pick up a plate, his wife picks up a plate, his children pick up a plate, and queue up for food. So those people who are in camp, a lot of them, if they had opportunities, if they had options, they would leave camp.
Okay. Okay. Now, yeah, I'm going to ask you maybe a very unfair question. You work with CESO.
Yes.
Is yours one of the so-called questionable NGOs?
You know, when I walked in and I saw Doctor here, and we just started talking, I said, oh, what do you do? And he told me, oh, he's and I got so excited. Why? Because we're one of those NGOs that visited that transit camp he talks about in Gombe back in 2014, November 2014. And we did that with funds that were donated, actually, by individuals and by a private sector donor company. And we were just going around some of the states in the north to see what was really going on with displacement over there. And of course, we made reports back to our supporters, and we have over 2,000 supporters, and we even published what we did with an online publication, and the title of that was called Do They Know It's Christmas? Because we went in November 2014. So I say all of that to say, no, we're not. And we have our track record to prove that. But more than that, I mean, again, I got excited because everything he's telling you, we're witness to it in Gombe.
Okay. Now tell us about the work you've been doing with IDPs.
So the work we've been doing with IDPs, we actually started working with IDPs in Benue as a result of farmer-herder conflict, which was happening way back in 2014, but it did not get a lot of attention.
We're just hearing about that now.
Boko Haram. In the Northeast. In fact, we tried to get some international journalists in to tell the story, and one of them told us the truth is everybody is interested in Boko Haram. So even though there are people dying here, the focus is up there. So those are some of the things we see. So we started working with them, and then of course we're based in Lagos for funding purposes because we made a very conscious decision to try and tell the story of displaced persons to Nigerians outside of the development sector, so they understand what's going on. And we now started seeing displaced persons. We started seeing more people in Lagos from the north. We knew something was going on. And so that was when we decided to do this tour of some of the states in the north. So we've been in about 7 states across the country, just visiting camps, trying to tell the stories of displaced persons, taking what relief materials we can do, and just trying to advocate and say, look, first, this is what an IDP is. That was in 2014, just trying to convince people that we had a displacement crisis. And we've all seen that has come to be. And last year was spent just basically telling the stories, even of IDPs in Lagos, which a lot of people find hard to believe or accept. But I mean, come on, in the world, if people are fleeing to places like Europe when there's a crisis, why do you think in Nigeria people won't flee to Lagos when there's a crisis somewhere else? And we began to tell the stories and try and just say, look, this is what's happening. These are the stories of those who are displaced. This is how you can help. You know, you can give relief materials. But beyond that, I'm very, very excited right now because we started trying to get people to help. As Dr. Hasil said, they're not a homogeneous group. There's some of them that have skills. They had minor businesses that they fled down to Lagos or other places they're trying to survive. They're not looking for handouts. And we've happily just signed an agreement with 2 donors who are going to help displaced women start up micro businesses, things they're already doing. They're frying akara or something, just to help them feed their families. We're piloting it. It's new territory for us. But we're happy that we're going beyond just the relief now. There's a lot of work to still be done. We're also trying to, of course, get more attention on IDPs in other places outside of the Northeast. People who have fled outside of the Northeast. So that's a huge advocacy challenge for us as well.
As you go about what you're doing, I mean, the federal government declaring a nutritional emergency, what does that say? I mean, we've had news of relief materials that are meant for internally displaced persons being diverted, and sometimes by aid workers. So what does that say about the things that were supposed to be given to the IDPs?
I think it's a coordination problem. One of the things that CISO, we've written to the Office of the Vice Presidency, we've said we've been to these states, these are the things we're seeing. And one of the things we also said at a round table to that office was we need to understand who is in charge so we know who to hold accountable when things go wrong. I mean, with all due respect, for goodness sake, we've had this issue for about 5 years going on, or 6. Why are we still talking about people in camps? Only 8% of the displaced are in camps, at least, or even if they're even up to that. Most of them are in host communities. He can attest to that, right? And the truth is, we're still having issues with food distribution, people bringing issues, because there is no coordination, and we don't even know who to hold accountable. So, for example, we have this situation in Bama, which should not have been the case. And we're still talking, we're declaring a nutrition emergency. We've had this situation for 5 years. So the question is, where does the buck stop? Who should we hold responsible for this issue? We're having, they say there are graves that were dug, at least 1,000 children buried in Bama. It's a scandal. And we as NGOs, we as part of civil society, we need to start asking the hard questions. Who is responsible? And those are some of the things we need to be looking at. This whole nutrition emergency, fine, we've addressed it. So where do people go? Who is in charge? And we need more information on that. We appreciate that that has been done, but we need more information from the responsible quarters, whether it's NEMA or whoever else, on what are the next steps. And we need to be hearing from them more regularly.
Or SEMA.